Does BLM stand for Black Lives Matter, or does it stand for Be Like Marx? We'll talk about that on this segment of Stopping Socialism TV. But before we do, YouTube and Google, they're not doing us any favors when it comes to getting these videos out. So we need you to help. You got to like these videos, you have to share them, and most importantly, you need to subscribe to our channel. That'd be greatly appreciated. So Justin, this is a new article on Stopping Socialism TV, all about Black Lives Matter. So maybe you can just kind of take us through what this article is trying to get across.
Yeah, I think one of the things that really needs to be explained in all of this is for those of us who are critical of Black Lives Matters, it's not that we think that Black lives don't matter. It's not even that we think that people shouldn't say Black Lives Matter, because that means that if they say that, then they're not, thinking about all lives. Like, I understand the argument that there are people who believe that African Americans are not being treated fairly, and they're trying to make a clear statement that African Americans, that their lives matter too, and that we should care about African Americans. Like, that's the argument for a lot of people. And I am sympathetic to the reasoning behind that argument. With that said, many of the organizations that are behind the protests that we've seen, some of the riots that we've seen, some of the revolutionary actions that we've seen, they are not primarily interested in just racial harmony. That's not what they're primarily interested in. I would argue that's not the main focus at all. I would argue that they are very clearly focused on promoting socialism, Marxism, division, class warfare, and that these things, this isn't my interpretation necessarily of some of it is interpretive, but most of this is just on their websites. Right. And that there's a difference between the organization Black Lives Matter and organizations like the Movement for Black Lives and the people who just march in the streets and protest because they think that African Americans are being mistreated. There's a difference between these two things. And what the person marching in the street doesn't necessarily know, although some of them know this, but not all of them know this, many of them don't, is that the people who are running many of these organizations that are getting millions and millions and millions of dollars sent to them, they are radical socialist Marxists, and they want revolution in many cases, and they aren't hiding it. This isn't a white conspiracy. This is on their website. Mm-hmm. And so this article is meant to show people using direct quotes, some of the things that they are calling for, some of the things they believe, the things that are listed right on their websites, articles they've written, etc., so that you can see for yourself. This is what these people are actually calling for. Again, not the person necessarily walking in the streets, although there are some people doing that. There are some people who are far left-wing radicals in the streets, but the organizations themselves, the leaders of many of these movements, they are in fact very radical people, and we need to keep that in mind.
Yeah, no, and I think that's like a very important point to make very clear. It's like the statement itself, like Black Lives Matter. Like, great, that's fantastic. Let's go shout that at people. Like, okay, no problem with that. It's the organization that I think most people on the right have issue with, and we'll get into some of the reasons why here. But the left is really good at doing this, and I'll just take a little short tangent to kind of highlight that, and that's like Antifa, right? Like, who's against people who are against fascists, right? Who's for fascism? Like, nobody. But like Antifa, calling themselves Antifa, it's like, let's just call our a group the good guys. Nobody can be against the good guys. Nobody could be against Antifa. It's like, But when you actually look at the organization, there's a lot to criticize. But so let's get to some of these specific things here. Go for it.
Oh, yeah, you're kicking it to me. I get it. All right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So for example, these are all direct quotes. These are some of the things that these organizations are calling for. Quote, real, meaningful, and equitable universal healthcare. All right. So we're talking about, in their minds, it's single payer healthcare, so government run healthcare. A constitutional right at the state and federal level to a fully funded education. So
does that mean like through college? Because
I believe
it would have to, right?
Yeah, because we already have we already have that. Essentially, we don't have a constitutional right to it, but we already have it.
Sure.
I suppose it could be, they could mean maybe K through 12, and what they're concerned with is fully funded. So maybe they want more funding guaranteed at the constitutional level.
Mm-hmm.
But the way I read that was free college, a progressive restructuring of tax codes at the local, state, and federal levels to ensure a radical, it's their word, and sustainable, I don't even understand what that means, redistribution of wealth. All right, well, that's pretty clearly Marxist. There's no hiding that. Reparations in the form of a guaranteed minimum livable income. So that means taking your money from you, if you're a taxpayer, and giving it to other people so that they are guaranteed a minimum livable, not wage. These people aren't working, income. They're guaranteed an income.
I see. Yeah.
Reparations in the form of corporate and government reparations. I don't see how that's different from what we just read. And ensuring our access and control of food sources, housing, and land. So they want essentially free food, free housing, and free land, along with a minimum guaranteed livable income. All right. So these things sound very Marxist to me.
Yeah.
Federal and state jobs programs that specifically target the most economically marginalized. I mean, we already have that, I guess, in a lot of ways. Democratic control over how resources are preserved, used, and distributed. Now, this one is Marxism,
That's Marxism.
and it's like the Cliff Notes version of Marxism. It's democratic control. This is Karl Marx could have written this. Democratic control over how resources are preserved, used, and distributed. Notice how they say resources, presumably all resources, are used, preserved, and distributed. So this is Marxism at its core.
Yeah. So how many people, like percentage-wise, marching in the streets, carrying the banners for this, for just saying the term, that I think is it's fine, Black Lives Matter. What is the percentage of people in the streets that are actually that are aware of the Marxism underpinnings of the organization?
So I think that answer, I think the proportion has changed over time, pretty dramatically. I would say that in the beginning of this whole thing, I would say it was a very small proportion, tiny,
Sure.
maybe less than 1%.
Right.
I think that over time it's grown larger and larger and larger. And I think now it depends on where you are and what the circumstances are. But if you're asking me, what's the percentage of people in Portland who have been, essentially in a continuous state of revolution for more than 3 months, what is their opinion of all this? What do they know of all this? I would say that the majority of them probably believe in a lot of this stuff. So I think it depends on where you are. And I think it depends on who you're talking to and whatever, and where you're at in this timeline. But I think in the most recent iteration of it, in places like Portland and Seattle, the CHOP zone, places like that, I mean, I would say that the majority of people believe these things. I don't think the majority of people sitting at home, though, who see stories about Black Lives Matters and whatever on network news stations and things like that, I don't think that they have any idea that this is going on at all. And I think that if you told them that, they would probably say that you're just making it up, or that maybe you're a racist, or that maybe you're just trying to undermine this whole. I'm just taking the quotes. I'm taking them seriously. And and those of us who are taking these people seriously are recognizing that this is what they're actually calling for. And so don't blame me, because I'm just telling you what they have said. Don't get mad at us. We're not the ones making this stuff. We're not putting words in their mouth. And some of the other things in this article, I mean, there are other great quotes as well. The author who's
how about
Chris
this one? Look at this
quotes.
Look at this one, a BLM statement where they're lamenting the loss of Fidel Castro. We are feeling many things as we awaken to a world without Fidel Castro. There is an overwhelming sense of loss, complicated by fear and anxiety. Although no leader is without their flaws. Oh yeah. all those like human rights, like egregious human rights, like violations. Those are just they're people are without their flaws.
That time that he almost destroyed the entire world with the Cuban Missile Crisis. Yeah,
Yeah,
everyone's got their flaws.
yeah, or like political dissidents just like disappearing because they wrote like an article. That's just flaws.
No one's perfect.
We must push back against the rhetoric of the right and come to the defense of El Comandante.
It's amazing. Revolution is continuous, it goes on, and is won first in the hearts and minds of the people, and is continually shaped and reshaped by who? By the collective. No single revolutionary ever wins or even begins the revolution. The revolution begins only when the whole is fully bought in and committed to it, and it is never over.
Yeah.
That sounds great. That sounds really warm and fuzzy. These guys are psychopaths. And that's the thing. They're communist psychopaths. And you just have to accept that that's who a lot of these people are.
So, I mean, like, it seems like the goal of this organization is to find, like, disaffected people and disenfranchised people and convince them that the only way to, like, some type of just life is to embrace these ideas of Marxism. And it's like, I don't know. I mean, it seems like it might be working. So what do we do to push back against that specifically?
Yeah, well, I think that the number one reason why this has become so popular among many people, because you got to remember, a lot of these people who are protesting in the streets are not necessarily desperate people. A lot of them are middle class, upper middle class, wealthy people. I mean,
Sure.
There's a lot of those people who have bought into this. And historically, you'd be surprised how many wealthy people have been socialists and communists. It's pretty common. And so I think that it depends on which group you're talking about. But ultimately, I think that the reason fundamentally this exists is partially because the right historically has been so focused on individual liberty on its just from a principled perspective, that they sometimes lose sight of the fact that people desperately want to believe that they're doing something to help other people, and that they desperately want the world to be a better place. And they look around them and they see everything corrupt and they see everything broken. And then all they hear from people who are on the right is the status quo is good enough.
Right.
That's what they hear. When really, when you're talking to people, in the circles that we're running in, right? We talk about policy all the time. We work at a think tank. People complain all the time. Things are terrible. They're broken. They don't work very well. I mean, we don't like the system the way it is now. We want the system to be totally different too. But is that the impression that we give other people? Probably not. I think the impression that the right has a tendency to give the outside world is that things are good enough. Look at how good things are. And when people hear that, they assume what we mean is we don't think this is as good as it gets. So if there's people suffering, too bad. Yeah. Whereas that's not really what I believe. What I believe is things could be a lot better.
Yeah.
I just have I believe the way to make things better is not to blow up society and put, the collective in charge of everything. I believe there are all sorts of other ways that we can improve life for everybody. But what I want is for everyone to be wealthy and happy and have access to everything that you could possibly imagine. I want everyone to be as wealthy as the wealthiest person was 100 years ago or whatever. I want continuous progress where people are constantly becoming increasingly more wealthy. That's what I want. And that's really what we've seen happen. Really. I mean, if you go back 100 years ago, life was a lot worse for your middle class person than it is today. Life has gotten better. And that doesn't mean that I think where we're at now, we should just stop. I think progress needs to continue going forward, and we need to continue making life better for everybody, and we shouldn't settle for mediocre. But on the other hand, I think what the track record of the left is just chaos and destruction and just pure madness and violence in many cases and all these other things. So I want progress, and I think that we need to be better about explaining that aspect of it and saying,
Right.
things could be a lot better. They should be a lot better. We shouldn't settle. Like, we don't ever say things like that. And I think that's partially our fault. So we've opened up this window where one side's able to walk in the door and say, you know what? These people over here, they think this world we live in now with all of its corruption and greed and it's broken and everything, that's good enough. That's what they think. And they think that if you're going to die in the streets because you don't have health insurance coverage, well, screw you. They don't care. That's what they think. And that's because we don't do a good enough job of saying, no, we want to fix that. That is a problem. Let's fix it.
Right.
And, we need to change.
Yeah, it's kind of remarkable. I mean, like, you could take like the person that's mostly on the left and the person that's like the most to the right. And it's like they want the same thing. They want prosperity and people to live happily ever after, right? It's just the solutions that are proposed to meet that end goal are radically different. Whereas they want to put the government in charge of everything and manage resources and figure out how to give people food properly. We want the government to get out of the way. Get out of the way. They're the ones that are screwing this stuff up in the first place and holding back progress. So it's like the end goal is the same. The plans to get to that end goal are radically different. So yeah, but your point is perfectly stated, Justin. I think that should pretty much do it for this segment of Stopping Socialism TV. If you want to see more videos like this, you can find our YouTube channel, Stopping Socialism TV. Make sure to share these videos, hit that subscribe button. You could also find a lot of our content, or all of our content, on stoppingsocialism.com, and we post most of that on Facebook, Stopping Socialism. You could also find our Instagram account, our Parler account, Twitter account. We're pretty much on all social media across the spectrum here. Justin, where can the fine people find you?
At Justin T. Haskins, Facebook and Twitter.
All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.